welcome back to another edition of Inside Great Lakes Sailing. My name is Greg Normand, your host. I think we have a very interesting show. We've tried really hard over the last few weeks to be able to get out and get live video of various activities and talking with people. This is a more cerebral show, but I think it'll be worth the time because we touch on documentary films and, more importantly, literature and books. We are spending some time with the folks from Mighty Mary, and if you're not sure who that is the all-female crew in 1995 who raced for Bill Koch and America's Cup. Only lost the last day to Dennis Conner. We talked to some of the crew members, but mostly we talked to the director and writer of the documentary that was just debuted at the Nantucket Film Festival. And it'll be out on DVD and in your theaters come early part of September. We're looking forward to seeing that. We had a chance to talk to Mary Mazzio. Mary was the writer and the creator of this particular documentary, which is outstanding. We had a chance to spend some time with her talking from Boston. We also have a chance on the same one to talk to Leslie Engot. Leslie is the first woman to ever skipper an America's Cup boat. Leslie is one of the best female sailors that ever lived in the last 75 years. And then we touched base in Cleveland with the sisters. And Pettibones are unbelievably talented. Katie and Debbie were both part of this process. Debbie Pettibone Cooper. Katie is a part of an Olympic program, a silver medalist. And they're going to talk a little bit about the program, a little bit about the movie, and being sort of eulogized. We have a number of people that we attempted to talk to. We tried to hook up for about 3 minutes with Hugh Jackman, the great Wolverine star. And I don't mean Ann Arbor. But our interview didn't quite work out. We're going to try and catch up with him in September to be able to get some of that information. He's actually narrating it with Elizabeth Banks. And we did get some pictures from the event in Nantucket, which you're seeing now. And I think that'll be interesting. And we're going to have an entire discussion about the movie and what it meant to be a part of it. And we're going to finish up today with a former University of Michigan professor, NL Duran, who's got a brand new book out. And it's a fictional book that starts in Lake St. Clair. It faces some interesting discussions about two people, a husband and wife, that decide they want to make sort of around the trip worthy opportunity. And it's a very interesting book that'll be out. It's on Amazon now. And you got to take a read because it faces the certainty of cancer, the certainty of life, and the moral question of what comes first, your earthly life or what moves on past it. And we spent some time talking with Mr. Duran from Fiji, which is where the book ends up. And I think you'll find it to be an interesting and industrious story. So we'll be back in a second with all of the action, and we'll pull Mary first. And again, this is one of those you got to listen to, but it's a very interesting story by some of the best female sailors that ever got on a boat. So we'll be back in a second.
I don't remember how it started.
Go to that.
Our back and forth. It always came back. Dad! You probably don't remember what you told me.
That was perfect.
But I heard every word.
Welcome back. We are talking to an effervescent Mary Mazzio or Mazzio, depending upon whether or not you're from Boston. I just learned that little trick. I spent a little time in Lake Placid, but we used to get down to Boston. But one of the great American documentary filmmakers. We've got all kinds of background, and we're going to go through some of that stuff. But we're talking specifically about Mighty Mary, which is something that will come out in September. You just had a Nantucket film debut.
Yes.
We've had a conversation with a number of folks that were part of that crew that are on this show. And we're going to go through your background. You've been a lawyer and documentary filmmaker. But I guess the easiest question and the easiest thing to start with is you now have a finished product. And we can see from some of the video and some of the pictures that came from Nantucket, you're obviously pretty proud of this documentary and for good reason.
Well, thank you. I mean, Greg, my very first film was a story about these women who kind of crashed the boys' party, if you will, at Yale University when Title IX was kind of a new thing. Nobody quite knew what it meant. And what did it mean to have women going into spaces that had not simply been accessible? And here we are, how many years later? I made that first film in 2000, and I was making it for my infant daughter. Turned out that movie was for many other people's daughters. And so over the course of our career, I've really been drawn to David and Goliath stories, ordinary people doing extraordinary things. And here we are full circle. We opened our doors in 2000, and here we are 2025, 2026 with an unbelievable hidden gem of a story, not hidden necessarily to sailors, but certainly to the rest of America, about this groundbreaking team. And, I was remarking to someone earlier this week, you had a seminal moment in the 70s. You had Billie Jean King take on Bobby Riggs, right? And it really shattered the myth that women could not be competitive. However, Billie Jean King played a 46-year-old hack. Fast forward to 1995. These women, these rookies, these newbies, if you will, that jumped aboard America Cubed and Mighty Mary, they were facing down and going toe-to-toe with the best sailors on the planet. And you and I were talking a minute ago, the Dennis Conards, the Tom Widdens, the Paul Kayards, the Geordie Shavers, Andreas Josenhans. I mean, decorated, as you called it, they had all been to the show. These women had not even been in the minor leagues, right? You had many of them, however, and it started, as you probably remember, with Bill Koch, with what became a wild experiment. And there are a lot of pundits on why he did it, which is hilarious and multifaceted. But at the end of the day, after placing an ad in the New York Times, no experience necessary, and I remember talking to Kimo Worthington, who was one of the head coaches, and he said, "Are you profanity free, by the way, on this podcast?"
Say what you want.
Okay. He was like, "Holy shit, the number of applicants that came in with like posing next to a cactus with a bathing suit." And he's like, "No, that does not qualify you to get on, a 70-footer. Like, just no." And so, it's pretty amazing that at the end of the day, the talent that was assembled, Olympians, yes, they were dinghy sailors, but Olympic sailors, you had an American gladiator, weightlifting champions, you had the Olympic rowing contingent. And I was on the Olympic team with many of the grinders that jumped aboard Mighty Mary. And so when I heard the twists and turns of this campaign, what they achieved, what happened down the road, I was like, this is a murder mystery. At some point, I would love to sink my teeth into this story. And it felt like, the time was right. Given where we are today as a country, that unifying, power of sport, Greg, and here you had fierce, antagonistic adversaries, right? You had the men with, as Kayard said, everything to lose. These women that are perceived to be a publicity stunt, kind of a joke. And what these women were able to achieve was jaw-dropping, A, and B, to now come 30 years later and hear both the women recount their experience, but the men as well. That, that the hair on the back of my neck started to stand up when, T.A. McCann, who of course won the America's Cup with Bill Koch's team in '92, he's now with Dennis and Team Dennis Conner in '95. He said, "Boy, yeah, when I think of how we acted, I would be very embarrassed if I participated in that." And then to have somebody like Paul Kayard say, we were going through like the societal change in the 90s. We weren't sure if the women should belong. They weren't, right? We're all trying to figure out where we're going, but it's really important to remember that we need to move away from what our fathers may have taught us and lean into what our sons are learning. So the degree of nuance and reflection that the men brought to this project honestly blew me away. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I lived in San Diego in the 80s and was part of the San Diego Tribune. And so we got involved in Connor's heyday. And when they had and I've told this story a couple times, but when they had the monohull against the catamaran, there was a certain amount of arrogance on both sides, and we all worked as volunteers for either Stars and Stripes for Michael Fay, because part of it was they would want publicity, and we would get a shirt and a hat and a ride on the boat. there's no lack of arrogance in those days, and it didn't matter. But interestingly enough, in 1984, I drew my second assignment for the Olympics was covering women's marathon, which had only been run for the first time in '84 in Los Angeles.
Joni.
Well, Joni Benoit. So the interesting part of it, we went to the original press conference, and they're explaining how the powers to be, and mostly the medical staff, finally thought women could run the marathon. And I remember asking a question. I said, the women have been running the Boston Marathon as an example since the 1920s. So I said, what is it that was different in Boston that might be here in a smog-related Los Angeles? And they had no good answers. But having grown up in a feminist household where mom had a career, we didn't have Archie Bunker household. It just seemed crazy to me. And then, so this film comes along, and again, I know some of the participants, so the question I'm going to ask you is, should we be talking about good sailors, or should we talk about gender? And I think that's kind of the point.
And maybe it's a little bit of both.
Yeah.
I mean, look, Dennis had a ferocious reputation. I mean, as a strategist,
You're being kind.
And you know what? All the guys talk about that. And then they talk about what he was like when they became part of his team. And, in speaking with Dennis, who I'm so grateful, by the way, he rarely sits for interviews. I'm really grateful he participated. We had a mutual friend who was a grinder of his that was an Olympian who knew me, right? But what was shocking to me in many ways was that he had Christy Steinman as a navigator as part of his team in 80. Wait, what? There's a woman aboard? It wasn't easy for her, but the fact that he had a woman as kind of his key backup navigator, and then followed by, of course, Dory right after that. And so you think of somebody like a Dennis with his reputation, I thought that was really extraordinary. And so hearing what he had to say in his recollection of the campaign was it, given his public persona, which I think, was part of his strategy. I think he's an extraordinary, not just an athlete, but a strategist. He calculated every move. And I remember he said to me, some of the women were like, knew him from San Diego that were aboard Mighty Mary. And they're like, he's not talking to us. Like, what? And he said, listen, when you're competing for the America's Cup, you're not going to the candy store with your opponents. They are right. And so you could immediately understand what his mindset was. And then for the women who are coming into this arena, right, and battling assumptions of what they couldn't do, especially the strength piece. And that was exciting because I knew these grinders. I knew what badasses they were. I knew how powerful. I knew they could squat 450 pounds in the gym, right? Like, I knew them, and I thought, ooh, this is going to come down to a test of experience. Because like you said before, this is the show. And just because you're strong doesn't mean you're going to win. It's technology. It's all that goes into knowing what to do if the shit hits the fan on the last leg, right? And the spinnaker blows. Are you prepared? Are you ready?
With all those conversations, we know now in this modern age of the 2025, 26, that a lot of sailing is technology. We certainly know that with all the foiling boats. I would make an argument in those days, it was in fact artistic as compared to being scientific. If you think of 77, and if you go all the way back to 74, Ted Turner lost the America's Cup Challenge because his sails just wore out because they were made of Dacron. And so it became an artistic thing, and touch was part of that process. Now it's about loading in all that information from Oracle. So my question, was that any kind of a plot line from what was and what is, maybe from that standpoint, or is that just
a little bit? And I'll tell you why. Because when Bill Koch and his America Cube team won in '92, he was firmly committed to the notion of technology, right? And he had the finest designers. He had a consortium at MIT. Not that the other syndicates did not, but boy, he took it to another level.
He was the first one. He was the first one to put television cameras on a mast.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. I think going into 95, right, there was this similar, well, wait a minute, technology can be so superior, I can put anybody on this boat, even women. And certainly when Mighty Mary came along, his expectation when she came along was that she would be 3 minutes faster around the course than the old A cubed boat they were sailing. The challenge was, from a technology standpoint, they had altered the design, masters, and everything was different for the women. And because it wasn't tuned up, they received the boat, I think, in the beginning of the fourth round, way late in racing. And so that technological advantage never materialized until the Italians bought the boat and apparently moved the mast and did the tuning up to really optimize that piece of technology. But certainly when the women were making that change, there was the rudder was so long, they had a hilarious nickname for it, the Johnny Holmes.
Yes.
And
if you're not familiar with Johnny Holmes is, you can look it up on
precisely
Wikipedia.
And Leslie Engot, who you're going to have on your show, she talked about, she just had such trouble steering downwind and couldn't literally, we had archival footage. She could barely turn the tiller because of how tricky that rudder was. And so there were some really interesting team dynamics that were quite a challenge for the women. But I think, Greg, to your point, at the end of the day, when the women could really take it to the best guys on the planet, like that was a statement. And it was a combination of, we can do it. We've got an owner who's investing in this, right? So Bill Koch deserves, of course, for irrespective of what his motivations were. I mean, he did something quite revolutionary back then. And then, Dawn, jumping forward to America True, being the first helmsperson. And yeah, she shared those duties with John Cutler, but, for her to be the first woman to leave an America's Cup syndicate in 2000 was pretty extraordinary. And they ended up defeating Team DC, in the semifinals and knocked them to the curb. So there's some great moments in poetic justice here. And Gary Jobson said, he said, when we look at the impact of that campaign, and you may have said this earlier, you still have this incredible paucity, this dearth of women at that big boat elite level. On the other hand, last Olympics was the first time there was parity for men and women at the Olympic Games. And Jobson was like, I firmly believe that, like, Mighty Mary opened the door to that kind of thinking. There really should be gender parity here for opportunities at the Olympic level.
I guess even with SailGP, when they have a press conference, which isn't a press conference, they ask the questions, but they bring a woman aboard and they celebrate it like we have just found fire. I just find it to be sort of ignorant, but neither here nor there. I got some inside baseball questions about. So you sit down, the spark of this story is in front of you. You obviously put together some kind of query, and then you kind of work through the process of doing the writing part of it and assembling all that information. So just from my own perspective, you have a documentary that doesn't necessarily have a positive ending, because as Katie will say later in the show, it was black for a while in her brain because they had lost, and that's certainly a competitive woman. But when you have a negative, so to speak, as a final outcome, how do you build a plot around whatever it is that you're building? And is it the joy and the overcoming of all the things that happen? What goes through your mind as a writer and this as you're going through this whole beginning, middle, and end?
Well, and a journalist, right? Like, I'm like you, but in a visual format. And so for me, that journey, when the women showed up at World Championships and came in second to all the America's Cup contenders, yes, it was a fleet race. Like, you're like, what the hell just happened? Wait, how is this even possible? That sort of David and Goliath story is, for me, doesn't mean you have to have the happiest Hollywood ending.
Okay.
Certainly when you get through the campaign, when you get to the finals of this thing, that the women could be neck and neck with these contenders, star-studded Olympians, multiple America's Cup sailors, and being able to outwit, the Tom Widdens and the Dennis Connors and the Kayards, right? Not all the time. And I think certainly at the end of the day, the women eliminated Dennis Connor from the America's Cup. That's a fact. Yes, he got back in. Yes, there was a backdoor deal, but irrespective of that, you have that one sort of extraordinary sort of salient point. And the fact that the women took it to everybody at the World Championships. For me, when you look to 2000, I think that's the upswing. That's the note. That's the exciting piece is, Dawn Riley comes out of this. She's like, okay, I've been on an all men's team. I've been on an all women's team. I'm going to form my own team now. What does that look like? And the fact that she and her under heralded team, America True, right, in a yellow boat that Phil Keiko, after his disaster with One Australia, right in 95, sinking, Phil rallies, creates this beautiful yellow boat, and they end up being the top contenders, right? America True being above the leaderboard, above Team Dennis Conner, above Paul Kayard's San Francisco team, right? And going into the semifinal round. And then, yes, Dawn did not win the 2000 America's Cup, but she did eliminate Dennis Conner. All right, that's great movement. That's a great sort of plot point, if you will. We couldn't, just because of real estate being tight, and this being a columnist and a writer, we couldn't get into everything else that everyone did. But, JJ Feder goes off and becomes a silver medalist at the next Olympic Games, right? Leslie Engot, Courtney Becker-Day goes and competes. Amy Fuller, wins ultimately a gold medal for the U.S. for rowing. So you have just this, it's a pathway, if you will, for excellence. And really, I think the point was we can compete on the world stage with the finest men in the world. And I think it's historic to be able to go toe to toe with the men in an arena like this, because it's so rarely done. Maybe you have, a female race car driver, the Danica Patricks, every now and again, it's one person, it isn't a team. And so this, I thought, was just an extraordinary story to dive into.
Do you have editorial or theatrical license in a documentary as a director?
You have to be very careful because, and it's interesting, Greg, and this as a writer, because I'm like you, I'm interviewing everybody. There are things that are saucy and sensationalistic. Do you include them? Is it funny? And at the end of the day, if it's not funny and it's really hurtful to somebody and it doesn't advance the story, it doesn't go in. So I take that responsibility, because film is forever. Just like you write something, it's on the public record. And so we don't make stuff up. We cannot do that. But to your point, you want to shape a compelling narrative. And so we did our first test drive with a non-sailing collegiate audience we had 3 lacrosse bros, and we had computer majors. And I was like, okay, we don't even have athletes. We've got sort of lacrosse bros as the athletes. I'm going to lose the whole crowd in the first 10 minutes, right? They were riveted, and they were asking me questions. It was a great test drive, because they said, well, why was it JJ, right, that may have come off the boat? What is a tactician? I was like, okay, note to self. We've got to explain why the tactician would be in the spotlight. And they said, the history of the America's Cup, we'd like to know a little bit more about that. And I was like, go to PBS for that. And then I was like, they have a point, right? We need to show, and it's interesting. We end up partnering with both Skydance and Paramount. And it was the same note, boy, we'd love a little bit more context. And we struggled. And I was like, oh, I have an idea for how to do that. So I hunkered down with my editor, and I remember showing it to my husband, the master of all trivia. He said, do you understand why the America's Cup was such a big deal? And I said, you're about to tell me. He's like, in 1851, Britannia ruled the seas, right? Yes, this was a young United States, but it was so momentous because it showed that Americans, right, that notwithstanding the dominance of the British Navy, that here you have this young upstart country achieving, that's its own David and Goliath story, right? So we have a little bit of that in the very beginning. And then, of course, Hugh Jackman and Elizabeth Banks both coming on board. Magic. I mean, magic. And Hugh, of course, owns Sail GP with Ryan Reynolds. He's a sailor from way back. He, of course, lived in Australia during the Dennis Conner heyday. So, of course, he was super animated. And Elizabeth Banks, for her part, owns a women's soccer team. So it's just a great pairing. It's quite rare to have two narrators in a documentary, and it's just it was magic, honestly, kind of putting that together.
I asked a question. The movie Rudy, we're very familiar. You mentioned lacrosse. I'm a lacrosse coach, and I think those guys think they're athletes, but that's for another point.
The guys were my lacrosse guys, by the way, asked the most interesting. Like, I was thrilled that they were in hook, line, and sinker on this thing.
Well, the lacrosse coach at Notre Dame is his father was the athletic director at the time. Kevin Corrigan's dad was the athletic director, and the Rudy movie is about 8% real and 92% just fictional stuff made up by the writer. And that's, from that perspective. I also know that the movie Wind, if you watch it with
Of course.
it's certainly a plot about, the 88 game, but it's really not great. Obviously videography is phenomenal. Film was fabulous, but
unbelievable.
The Whomper would have torn if you put the Whomper up based on its size, it would have ripped any mast down on any boat in America or any, around the world. So that's kind of the point I'm asking. But as you're built,
I think, if we think about a scripted feature that could come out of this, sure, there's always creative license, right? It's sort of like loosely based on. But I feel like with a documentary, it's incumbent from a journalistic integrity standpoint. You cannot stray. You just can't. And we talked about process in the beginning. My process is a little backwards because what I do is I will take the most compelling things that people say, clip that, and then I have this giant jigsaw puzzle. So instead of thinking, oh, A to B, B to C, C to D, how am I going to tell this story with filler and maybe things that are kind of boring or right? I'm like, let me assemble the best, most compelling things that people say and go from there. And it makes it way harder, but it's so much more interesting. And I think one of the reasons like our test collegiate kids didn't reach for their phone, right? Were riveted is because you want to have people's performances, their own statements, their own testimony that keeps people on the edge of their chair, right? They're the storytellers. And so I'm just trying to stay out of the way and construct something that, people will be like, okay, I can't even get up and get my Doritos. I'm going to miss so much if I do that. So
if you go back and watch our show with Dawn, our show with Dave Dellenbach, and our show with a number of the people that were part of this, it's interesting because Dave obviously replaced them. We're not going to talk politics, but Dave replaced JJ for a reason. But if you talk to 5 people listening to our show, there's 5 different reasons. The only question I asked Leslie, which made sense, was because he had been a part of that team. He was probably the perfect guy to come in because he's such a sweet guy, such a reserved kind of personality. And if he'd have been a barker, so to speak, it would have never worked. So they made the right choice in that situation. Whether they made the right choice, that you could spend 2 hours discussing that. But I find at least it was a genuine decision why they made it, and that's kind of part of the process. But I think the interesting part of this is that these women have not only had great careers then, but they continue with their careers.
Yeah, and I think so many of them learned really important lessons around leadership, teamwork. I mean, this was the first team in America's Cup history that did not have a skipper named. And, and that, certainly Vincent Moyer-Sims, who ran the campaign, Stu Argo, when they reflect back on, their focus was like, holy shit, we've got to get the women up to speed from a skill standpoint. Forget about tactics and leadership right now. We've got to get them so that they can maneuver the boat, get her around the course. And so that was sort of left until the last possible moment. And, when you have a vacuum in leadership, it makes it quite challenging. And how do you move forward even when those things are happening? So, so many of the women had such really profound reflections on notions of leadership and teamwork and a hugely diverse team. You had Shelley Beatty, who was deaf, right? You had Suzette Smith, a native sailor with a completely different kind of mindset. And you sailors are like a super salty bunch, right? And the rowers were quite and didn't sway.
You had Leslie, who was basically a New Zealander because she left here when she was 10.
Yeah.
So she had to pull a passport in order to participate.
Exactly.
One of the questions, you obviously been a world-class athlete as a crew, as a rower.
Thank you.
Do you think that experience gave you some insight to these women that might have not been the case if you were just another writer director coming from some other place?
You know what? Thank you for that. I think for sure I could appreciate the physical program, right? Like we have footage of them weightlifting, and like you rarely see when you see films about female athletes, it's like, oh, how did you feel and how were you perceived? It's like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Like, let's talk about what you did. What was the training like? What were the tactics like? How did you learn all this stuff? You had 10 months to mount an America's Cup campaign. Like, that's a Herculean task. How is that going to work? So I do think understanding the physicality of this, understanding what it is like on a team of women, which I've never been on a team of, the only woman in a team of men or a team of men. So I can't really speak intelligently to that, but I can certainly talk about the dynamics of a team of women. And so I felt that was, I certainly had that understanding as a going in proposition.
Your background as a rower and the physicality and all the things and the insights and the nuance of the inside of baseball sort of stuff. And you've kind of become, doing this film, an expert on sail racing just by osmosis, because maybe not be able to do it, but certainly the language and all the prep. You can't spend as the time that you've spent. But here's my point. If you had sailing, just to make a comparison or not, but are they equal in the task of getting better, or is one more difficult than the other?
Boy, I was going to say, I'm thinking if you had asked me, we had camera crews and this 65 footer, right, that we're out on, Wizard, and we were also out on Temptation, goes up on its keel. I was completely unprepared. I'm like, holy, what the and I was like, thank God I had been an athlete so I could clamber up to the other side, because, it's rigorous. I think the profound difference, in the sport of rowing, first of all, we're going backwards. So port and starboard is completely opposite. So there's that. We are constantly in motion, meaning the act for the 2,000 meters, it is full on, no stop. And certainly out sailing, you have these unbelievably intense moments, right? Typically when you're, rounding the mark or you're tacking or you're jibing, but then there's just a lot of, okay, I'm going to throw my legs over the side of the boat, right? And you're cruising, which is equally as exhilarating. So it's a little bit less of it's a grind, but it's a little bit less of a grind. You have these moments of woo, exhilaration. And my daughter, who is an Olympic rower, she was in Paris. She was a hockey player, and she said, rowing is a grind, hockey's a game, and it's fun. And so I would put sailing, it's a game of wits. It's you have to eat nails for breakfast for the expense of these boats and going, mano a mano. But you also have moments of exhilaration. And again, I'm a new sailor. I'd never really sailed at all in my life. And so, to be aboard these 65 footers and, was super, super exciting.
Was your story dictated by the stories you heard or the road you wanted to take down?
Oh, great question. And this as a writer, you have to go with what people want to tell you. You've got to follow that story, because otherwise, this is not my story. It just isn't. And if you try and inject your own agenda or your own what you hope to see, I think, I'm a little bit maniacal in terms of preparation. I pre-interviewed everybody in this film. And when the men started, saying, hey, I'll participate, I was blown away by the number of men that raised their hand. And I'm honestly so grateful, because as I mentioned before, they brought a nuance, a perspective that was really thoughtful and just creates a much deeper piece than woohoo, the women did a great job. This is so much more interesting and profound, I think, because of that.
Some of your documentaries have gone into some dark places and those kinds of things. This is certainly, passion and light to some extent, and certainly sort of opening the door so the world can see what was there. Those inside of sailing knew. Is it harder to do? Is there a difference between them, or do you kind of attack all of them the same way? I would think darker material would be harder to deal with because you're dealing with it every day.
That's a great question. I think everything we do, we make a great attempt not to be salacious. and what is the true journey here. And so even our more challenging, we did a film about online responsibility called I Am Jane Doe, and it dealt with trafficking. And I remember I had a donor that came to me and said, hey, I'm very interested. And I'm like, oh, this is such a dark topic. Like, I'm not sure I'm suited for this. And then I figured out, well, and then it took 2 years, and I saw this little article about these young girls and their mothers who were filing a lawsuit and fighting back. I'm like, that's the angle. That's uplifting. That's David and Goliath. That's going up against an entrenched system. And how do we dismantle that? And so I view sort of like so much of our work, even if it is in true, that was more true crime. From a commercial standpoint, it's way easier to do something on true crime because everybody's going to buy it. The Netflixes, the Hulus, the whatever. And so a film like this is so, I think, so inspirational in many ways, and feels like the right thing at the right time for where we are as a country. It's really the unifying power of sport, especially with gender layered onto it. And I think, listen, I was lucky, that we partnered up with our friends at Skydance Sports and then subsequently Paramount to kind of buy into that vision, if you will. And that's exciting when it's something not true crime, because true crime is the big seller in the documentary world. Like, you look at sort of all your, things on Netflix and others like that, you'll see a lot of true crime. And so, these had some hard moments too during this campaign, right? Some very challenging moments, some painful moments. And we don't shy away from that, Greg.
There is a lot of profit in theatrical theater, movies, documentaries. I'm guessing not so much. So is gathering, is it part of the process? I'm working with a company in Vancouver that's working on a Wayne Wong documentary. And Wayne Wong was the father of freestyle ski racing and skiing and doing all kinds of things. He was married for a while to Susie Chaffee, the old lipstick young lady. So he was doing things, and then Johnny Mosley eventually came along and doing the rest of it. My question is it hard to raise money for documentaries as compared to what it might be for a regular film?
Boy, both are very challenging. I've been so lucky to have a group of donors that honestly have kind of followed a lot of the work we do. So our lead donor is Arthur Blank. He owns the Falcons. My partner, Grant Hill, on this owns the Atlanta Hawks. Sue Wagner, co-founder of BlackRock, Bill McNabb and Katie McNabb, Bill ran Vanguard. So we have like very seasoned, highly discriminating group of donors that say, all right, what she's doing, right, is measurable. It has impact. And I'm really feel so grateful to have had the opportunity, that the kind of impact that our work has had has from, one of our films raised over $100 million with one White House. Another one of our movies catalyzed bipartisan legislation signed under the Trump administration, right? So I'm really focused on how do we weaponize content for positive change. And that for me is really exciting. In fact, Greg, you'll appreciate this. Our very first film that we started out with, which was kind of a Title IX, Go Girl, that ended up galvanizing a community in Michigan whose daughters were playing on landfills with shards of glass. Their boys were playing on manicured lawns. Night games for the boys, parents can't go to the girls' games at, 1 in the after, whatever. And so they all came to see, it was called a Hero for Daisy. And then they ended up suing the state association in Michigan saying, you cannot do this anymore. You've got to create fair conditions for our daughters, just like you do for our sons. And I got a call 12 years later, and they said, hey, do you remember us? We had a big screening. I said, you bust in 1,500 girls. How could I forget that screening? They said, I want you to know, like, your film was the catalyst, and the Supreme Court, the U.S. Supreme Court today ruled in our favor. State of Michigan now has to create equal conditions for our high school girl athletes. And, to know that something you've created has been able to motivate people in that way, like, oh, that, my friend, is the name of the game.
There's an interesting article that Bob Woodward wrote for the Vanity Fair in the middle 80s. And basically, the gist of the article was that every journalist is an activist because
100%.
you can't be a journalist without being an activist because you're taking, and I don't know that I ever agreed with it because I think I like to think of myself as an old school. You get both versions
Right. You
and you
have
do
to.
what you can, but that's not activism. It is what it is. But we all bring prejudice to the table.
Of
And
course.
so my question, I guess this is the last couple questions. What did you bring to the table that changed your mind in this project? In other words, you had some preconceived ideas going in. You had to have had. Nobody.
So,
And then the follow up question is that if they changed your mind, good or bad?
I'd say first of all, I wasn't expecting the men to raise their hands and participate in the way they did. That was surprise number one. I was surprised to find how thoughtful they were and honest they were about the experience and maybe how certain behaviors were, much more prevalent in the quote pre-Me Too age of the 90s. I found that sort of really extraordinary. And that, at the end of the day, we are all more alike than we are different.
Mm.
And for this group of men, white, affluent, privileged, to be speaking to, maybe there's room at the table for others. That is the most powerful, I think. And I alluded to that earlier with some of the statements that the men said. I thought to myself, this is the power of sport. This is why we do what we do. And so over time and space and 30 years for the men and women to come together and celebrate this shared experience, irrespective of the outcome, that's the beauty. And I think you asked me before, what do I bring to this? I remember having a similar experience at the opening ceremonies of the games. I'm standing there, I'm trading with Russians. And I'm like, he's like, I like your USA hat. And I said, well, I like your whole tracksuit. I traded one shitty little USA hat for his entire tracksuit. I was like, yeah, I won that interchange. But that beautiful humanity, communal feeling that you can get with sport. And I felt like that's what the men and women both brought to this experience in this project.
This is completely unrelated, but on the jersey it says it says CCCP.
Yes.
Yet it's USSR. And then there's no translation in that language that matches up. And I've asked this question of 100 Russians,
Oh,
and it
God.
doesn't translate because it's not Latin. See, that's the part. You have to remember it's part of an Arabic style alphabet. So the translation isn't ours like we would normally. And I have won more bar bets with what does CCP mean when it's USSR.
Guess
And
what? I have a jacket that says CCCP on it.
right, but that's
I'm gonna have to dig to this one, Greg. Now
it doesn't the alphabet doesn't translate. That's the point. And people, now we've got Wikipedia and we've got all the rest of it, but through the 80s. The other thing, and I'll end it with this, and I think the part of the process is when we were talking, but right now there's not a lot of interest in the America's Cup. We're following through with John Sweeney and we're doing some things with covering it. And it seems to have lost its luster for all kinds of reasons. Foiling is important to the sailing community because it's the only way television is going to cover it. But what's interesting is that between 1975 and 1985, more boats were built in that decade, in that split decade, and Razor cruisers, because it was leaving the rich man's elite sport and becoming relative to all of us. So everybody built boats in Rhode Island, from O'Day to Tartan to C&C to the rest of it. And you had some characters. You had Dennis Conner. You had some of those guys. And it washed away the yacht club version of it. The problem is 50 years later, it's kind of gone back to that. As I walk around my own yacht club, there's a lot more guys that look like me than look like my son or younger, right? And I think that's kind of the point, but it's just the nature of the rock and roll of what happens with any sport. And I think that's true.
Well, and listen, if we can bring some more visibility to the capability of women on the water, maybe they're not. Maybe women on a boat aren't bad. Maybe they're not bad luck.
Yeah.
All right, that's one game changer. And look what they were able to do. We did a project called The Most Beautiful Thing, Greg, about this amazing rowing team out of the west side of Chicago. And when this happened, it was 25 years ago. didn't have necessarily a measurable impact on the sport back then. But the film, A Most Beautiful Thing, has, with the protagonist, Arshay Cooper, has revolutionized the sport today.
Yeah.
You never, before the movie came out in 5 years ago, right, in 2020, you rarely saw young people of color in the sport. And today, because of the work Arshay's doing, the film, like, it's insane what's happened. And so sometimes, like a journalist, visual storytelling can help be a catalyst for just to unlock some more creative thinking.
Yeah.
So in any event, listen, before I let you go, when we're releasing, so we're in theaters, as you know, we open in 15 major cities to start. And if there's a lot of foot traffic, AMC Theaters, our longtime partner, will expand us. So I'd love to come back and we can chat about, the film itself going into that opening. But we'd love all your viewers, of course, to, buy out the theaters, buy seats for everybody they know, and excited for this journey.
Well, we'll finish the season for us end of September, end of August, first part of September. So we'll definitely do a conversation. We'll have some context because I'll have a chance to see the film. Having played, first of all, thank you so much for your time. I think it's going to be, we have the young ladies. I think it'll be a really good show. You obviously are very energetic. I think that's so terrific. And having played in 2 Beanpot tournaments, I know the difference between Boston University and Boston College. And I once asked Ken Reed which was the difference, because he, in fact, is a Boston University graduate. And I made mention of the interview starting that he was from Boston College, and he tore my head off.
I bet he did.
Rightfully so. And I should have at least checked my phone before I had that conversation. But you're nothing like Carla from Cheers. And again, that's an inside baseball joke. But
yeah, occasionally my husband reminds me, I lapse into my Boston accent when, like, I get stopped by the cops, or, somebody's parking my car, whatever. You can't help it. I don't know where I lost it. I think in college, I went to Mount Holyoke, a women's college, and
right.
Somehow lost it, but it rears up, and, I'm a masshole just like everybody else around here.
Well, we thank you for your time, and best of luck with the documentary.
Thank you so much, Greg. Look forward to talking again.
Welcome back. We're talking with 2 of America's great female sailors, in Katie Pettibone and her sister Debbie Cooper Pettibone. And we're going to talk a little bit about a recent documentary that was released from the '95 America's Cup, of which you guys were a part. And it's called Mighty Mary. We're part of a discussion with a whole bunch of folks who were involved in the project. And I just wondered, I guess the simplest and easiest first question is, you're kind of being, sort of indoctrinated into publicity, but you're also getting an opportunity to tell a story that should have been told a long time ago. So what's your thoughts on the documentary?
I think I'll jump in first here and say Mary started working with us on the project, gosh, it's a little over a year ago. To see it coming to fruition is truly amazing. And, and I will say from my perspective, as it's come together, we're starting to see the initial press, the website's live. It is really humbling. Like, we lived the story 30 years ago, and it's been a lot of years in between, but it's all come back, and you're remembering what it really was about so long ago. And it's pretty cool that it's still relevant, or still a relevant story today. And it's just so, I don't know, validating to see the story come forward now.
I am excited to see the movie. I haven't obviously seen it yet, but the fact that we're talking about it now is really cool, because we're in such a digital age, and this was all pre-digital. And sometimes it does feel like if you're not on the internet and you're not, like, in a Google search, you never existed. So the fact that this is coming back and telling our story is really exciting and actually heartwarming.
Yeah. To the both of you, is it kind of terrific to also have a chance to sort of share history with a sibling?
Absolutely. It's a shared lived experience. The only thing that both Debbie and I regret right now is that our mom passed 3 years ago. This is her birthday today, actually. Yeah. So None of this would have been possible without her love and support.
and our grandma's support. And I think we talk about that too. And we did back in the campaign in 1995. Kate and I learned to sail on the Great Lakes from our grandma, in many ways. So we're from a long line of women sailors coming from the Midwest, and just seeing it all come together right now is really cool.
I know you guys have both had a lot of experience at Port Huron Yacht Club. I know you guys have spent a lot of time there, which is an interesting place because Lake Huron is a little different than the rest of the Great Lakes. Doesn't get quite the publicity that maybe Superior and Michigan and certainly the Erie get. But freshwater, saltwater, it's a question I always ask, and it's a simple one. But since you grew up in freshwater, I'm assuming, Kate, you've done a couple around the worlds. So saltwater, freshwater, what's your favorite?
For gear preservation, freshwater, absolutely. But there's nothing like sailing the Southern Ocean swells. Those are pretty special.
Yeah. I'll get into the documentary, but I just wanted to sort of ask this question. In 1984, I covered the Los Angeles Olympics, and I got stuck with women's marathon. And up until 84, they had never run it before. And the excuses were that women weren't capable of running a marathon, yet they've been doing it in the Boston Marathon probably for 50 years prior to that. Turns out the winner, Joan Benoit, won. She would have been in the top 25 of the men's timing, even when we had a smog-filled Los Angeles. And part of the plot that week was, oh my gosh, women have this great opportunity. They could actually run as far as what men were. And this is an International Olympic Committee. We wait until 95 and decide that there's a bunch of women that can sail as good as men. Having grown up in a legal household, my mother was a prosecutor, and understanding that feminism was feminism before it was, is it taking too long to have this story? And shouldn't it just be good sailors as compared to gender? It's a long intro, but does that make sense?
Yes, I'll jump in on this one because Dawn Riley and I often talked about that. When we grew up sailing in the Great Lakes, we sailed with men. So out of all the sports that I could have pursued, sailing was the one that I chose because I could compete with men and against men and women. And so Dawn Riley's America True was the iteration where it was a deliberate mixed team. And so, yeah, I think it should at this stage just be good sailors, but I think I was the last person on a crew in 2007 America's Cup. And so there has been this fall off and decline, and it's a shame. But yeah, I mean, it should have been maybe done sooner, but we thought it was all going to happen naturally and the evolution would just continue. And I think with the women like trying to get back into the America's Cup, they have a requirement of having a female sailor now on the team. And the last America's Cup, they had that women's 40 little circuit. I think it's a good time to bring back this story because this is the story where women were competing against men head to head. We weren't doing a separate but equal kind of deal with a different circuit. And so hopefully this movie will help move that along with having women on the boat actually in the cup races.
Deb, any thoughts?
Yeah, I think back to 1995, and it seemed even back that long ago, it was like it was a natural evolution. Kate and I, again, growing up and sailing in Michigan and the Great Lakes, we had opportunity to join crews because we were good at what we did. And that was our mindset going into the America's Cup in 1995. We're good at what we do. And the expectations of our coaches and everybody supporting the team was that we worked really hard. We used our skills. I mean, we were always expected to compete at the highest level and not be given special consideration, et cetera. And I think what Mary's story, I think, will show is that we shocked the world because we competed on equal footing. And, having the story come out now, it's just such a good time because the sport is really evolving, and we want to have diversity in the sport. But I've always believed, and I know Kate 10 million times more, we want to compete on equal footing because of our skills, because we're capable, not because we're just women.
Except for you had a 40 boat length in that last race, and except for a win.
There we go.
Oh no,
No.
Kate's still struggling with that one.
Where's the alcohol?
No. I lived in San Diego for 16 years. I'm very familiar with Dennis and a bunch of other things. I could tell you all kinds of stories.
my point is that with the exception of that sort of spill, this wouldn't even be a conversation because you'd have gone on to compete. So part of sport is disappointment.
Yeah.
That's just the nature of the beast. It's just not everybody wins. And I think that's part of the story that Mary's telling, and having talked with some of the other folks, is that, again, this should be about sort of talent versus and luck to a certain extent, because sometimes you pick the right choice and sometimes you don't. 1980, the Russians shouldn't show up to play a hockey game, and it's one of those weird games that happens, but that's just the nature of sport. And I think that's part of the process. The camaraderie that seems to still exist within your crew is pretty amazing. Having talked to now probably 8 or 9 or 10 of the women at this point, and I'm certainly sure you guys share that same feeling.
Yeah, we got an opportunity to bring the crew together last May. And I think that's something that we all really recognized. It was like the team coming back together, and even getting back on the boats. There was a natural rhythm that just evolved, and because it's just what we did and what we knew. It was just so natural to everybody. And seeing posts on Facebook, and the team has been out for the premiere in Nantucket, and it's just like we're all like friends forever. And I don't think it should be a rare thing in sports that you have this when you do something extraordinary, that you build those sort of bonds. But we really did. And it's like we've fallen back into our old rhythm 30 years later.
There's an interesting part. I don't think anybody, you may know this, you may not know this. In January of 95, I worked for the New York Times for a long time, and I get a phone call from a friend of mine. He says, there's an ad in the New York Times looking for sailors for this event that Bill Koch is going to run. Now, he'd had some success in 92, and I'm thinking there's all these world-class sailors, because we've covered a couple of Summer Olympics, and we're advertising in a newspaper. And you didn't attract sort of the beer league guy or the winner of the two-handed race on Tuesday. You ended up with Olympians, gold medalists, and World Cup, America's Cup level kind of sailors. Did the Koch, or did you guys recognize how good you were? I'm sure you did. But is it possible that maybe the organizing committee that this was at the beginning, maybe a bit of a stunt?
I don't think I ever thought it was a stunt, but it's funny that you bring that back, because I remember I was living in Miami at the time. So was Kate, and Kate calls me because 94, no, internet's not really a thing yet, but she's like, "Hey, there's this team being formed. We should apply." And I was like, "Well, that's not something we can do. Like, we're just normal sailors from the Midwest. Like, that's not us." And Kate's like, "Oh, no. We need to give this a try." And so we kind of put our heads together. We put together our sailing resume and submitted it. And, and again, the rest is history, as they say. But it was all, from my mindset, it was always, wow, this is going to be the best of the best. Can we really be part of that kind of like that population? And, it was amazing. But yeah, Kate's like, "Here's the thing, let's go do this."
Yeah, I always took the attitude, you got to knock on the door for the door to open.
Yep.
So, you got to apply. If you can't be on the team if you don't apply.
Our second year of the show, Dave Dellenbaugh was on, and he
Mhm.
was complimentary. He's a guy who sort of stepped in for J.J. Eisler
Mhm.
and was never did anything except was there as a support material, and could not have been more supportive of you guys. And I think that's historically that's been true. But they did bring a guy on board, so to speak, and it was one of those processes. I know I coached college women's lacrosse, and when we first got into the sport, we were just short of the devil, because we didn't think the way young women thought. So I get the premise. Was his addition? Was it just talk briefly about that, because I'm curious when all of a sudden you've got this all female crew, and here comes a guy.
Well, so, it's interesting when we've often been asked about that, whether it's in other speeches or clubs and what remains true is, if you go back to the fact that we grew up in the Midwest sailing with men, it was very natural to have them. The other thing is, the team isn't just the crew. When you do a project like this, the team is the shore crew, it's the
Right.
office, so for us, it wasn't like we had this outsider come in. It wasn't like he hired I don't know, like Ed Baird to come in, who wasn't there.
Right.
Like Dave was with us from day one, coaching
Right.
and coaching and, sailing the two boats. And we sailed with mixed teams all the time in training. And so he was a part of the team. So it wasn't, I know for some it was a shock because they really wanted the all-female thing, but at least for those of us who grew up sailing in certainly in larger boats, it was very natural.
I also think there was brilliance in picking him with the kind of personality that he has. He is such a soft-spoken guy. He is such a guy that will just sort of fit in and never step on anybody's toes. And that's a really important factor coming into what you guys were training for. Um, just the last couple questions. You obviously don't get over the line. And Kate, I don't mean to get your stomach rumbling.
I'll survive.
But what was the feeling? Obviously you lost, but is there not also some thoughts of accomplishment at that point of going
No,
against?
when we crossed that line, it was like utter failure. I mean,
Okay.
anyone who's in sport knows that you have to visualize and live like ahead of, like, you're visualizing the win, you're visualizing the win. We knew we could do it. We were ahead. So we were actually in the event, like in that last race ahead. And it was all going according to the visualization and as we all know, with the wind and everything else. So when they actually crossed ahead of us, it was such a disconnect from what we like mentally thought the ending would be. The only time I've had a similar response is when I didn't end up, my partner and I didn't end up representing the U.S. at the Rio Olympics, and we lost by a point in the way the trials were being counted. And it was kind of a similar thing where your version of what you thought the world was going to be is no longer. And that was, I think, so we were devastated, absolutely devastated. And when we hit the shore, everyone was devastated. It wasn't just the people on board.
It was everyone.
It was everyone. And I remember Dawn Riley saying to me, because she's been there, done it, right? She's done the Americas, she's gone around the world. And she was like, I remember like putting her hand on my shoulder. Oh, it'll be okay. There'll be another regatta. And I'm like, but there won't be this again.
Right. Debbie, just curious.
I think it was disbelief, because we talk about, we, at the end of the day, the loss was not, the finish, the time at the finish, in light air and everything that was going on was a substantial gap. But you go back up to that top mark, the team was ahead by 4 minutes. That's a lifetime in sailing. And so to see it so dramatically go 180 degrees the other way, we were just in shock. And it was, how is it possible that it's ending? And it's like everything that we did every day for 10 months stopped, like you hit a wall. So it did take time to get your head around it. And yes, we did understand that we'd done something historic, but the emotions, it was your day to day. You didn't have to get up the next day and go train. You had to start thinking about packing up the boats, and it was just like a light switch flipped. And we did go on, and many of us, there was events and things that happened after the event was over, and we were able to talk on speaking tours, etc., and share that. And so yes, we did. You get your head around being part of a historic effort and accomplishing something people said we couldn't do, but it hurt for a long time.
Yeah, because ultimately we're all competitors, and the objective was to compete in the America's Cup and then go on to win. And we failed at that objective. So as just straight as a competitor, we didn't meet our objectives. And so when we crossed that line, we failed. And yes, we accomplished all these other things. And the other piece of that is how many times had so many people said, we're so glad that you didn't go to the America's Cup because nobody was going to beat New Zealand. They were so far ahead technically and technologically that America was never going to keep it. And they were glad that the women didn't lose it. I think I disagreed with that because I wanted to be in the ring, and I'd rather be in the ring and not in the ring. But now that I'm older and I have perspective,
There's that.
I think that's probably true.
Last question. Who's the best sailor of the two of you? Is that a long-standing argument, or is it a pretty easy discussion?
I concede.
Okay.
Yeah, Kate. I say that I say this to anybody who'll listen. Kate is my younger sister, but she's my hero. She's done such extraordinary things in the sport. I chose a path and pursued a business career, and I get to live a little bit vicariously through the things that she's been able to accomplish. But yeah, Kate's pretty damn good.
Oh, thanks, Deb.
There's a poll out that says that Kate's the third best sailor in U.S. history. Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I'd
go with that. Maybe better, but
I don't know where those come from, and is it tomato? I mean, I get that process, but it's certainly an honor to be able to have a conversation with the folks at the level you guys have been at. I think this is going to be really fun when folks get a chance to see this documentary, because I think it's important. I think the sport needs growth at this point, and one of the reasons we try to promote the sport at this level is because there's got to be more kids walking around our yacht club here that are 8, 9, 10, 11 years old, and I think that's an important fact. So thank you so much for taking the time. You guys are talking to us from Cleveland today.
Cleveland, yes.
Ohio.
We appreciate your time.
Thanks for having us.
Every day, thousands of kids start vaping. And I can't let this happen to my kid. Of course, it's awkward to talk to your kids about the dangers of vaping. Hey, bestie, how's sketches? Ready? It's hard to get their attention. Ready? Go. Yes. Look at that. Yeah, you didn't turn yours over. So if you want to talk to your kids about the dangers of vaping, you got to get it trending.
No, you're doing it wrong.
Let's go.
Can we talk?
Yeah, what's up?
Visit talkaboutvaping.org for tips on when and how to have the vape talk.
Welcome back. We are talking with one of the great female sailors of the world, and Leslie Engot. We're talking to you from Auckland, New Zealand, and it is Wednesday where you are and Tuesday where I'm at. And we are talking about the Mighty Mary. You were the skipper of that boat, the first woman to ever be appointed to being the helm of a America's Cup boat. And you're kind of being glorified, if you will, on film. And I just watched, they just had the big, huge Nantucket Film Festival debut. And I just wondered what your thoughts are after all these years of 30 years later. What's your thoughts?
Yes, I wish I could have been there to see it. So I don't know how it's come out, but some of the girls have let me know that they thought it was great. So yeah, it'll be. I'm heading over in September for a regatta, so hopefully I'll get to see it then. But it certainly will bring back lots of memories, I'm sure. It seems so long ago now that we had our time in the America's Cup, and it's amazing how just catching up with people and talking about it brings memories flooding back.
We're talking with some of the others. We've talked to the Pettibones. We've talked to Dawn, obviously Linda Bishop, and another variety of the crew. Should we be talking about women, or should we be talking about good sailors, that they were just good sailors? It was kind of a weird kind of process. You guys were unbelievable and obviously lost on that last day, but, neck and neck for a long time. You guys were right there.
Yes, if we got there through a lot of hard work, that's for sure. When we first got together, we didn't know each other, and we had at least 7 women on the team that had never really sailed much before. But we trained so hard. I'm sure we did more days on the water sailing than any other team to try to get ourselves up to scratch, so that we were competitive and that we did have a chance to do well and win. So I think a lot of it, yes, we're a women's team, but also we were competitive in the sailing, in the regatta, not just a showcase to be women on the boat, but we were actually right in there with a chance. In
the competitiveness of that event, I lived in San Diego for 20 years, so I know
the skipper of the other boat. What's it like to stare down Dennis Conner in a race of that magnitude?
Um, it was pretty amazing and surreal for me, especially the very first time, because when I was growing up, Dennis Conner was someone I'd followed and kind of idolized because he had had so much success in his sailing, and particularly the America's Cup. I remember watching him through the night in their racing, and so to me, he was like a sailing god, and to go up against him in that first race was pretty amazing. Yeah, I couldn't believe it was really happening.
Leslie, you were born in Greenville, South Carolina. You moved to New Zealand at the age of 10. You've won a silver
Yes,
medal
yeah.
as part of that National Olympics, and you're a silver medalist. You've won a variety of races. So you are a sailing family. You grew up sailing. Was mom and dad both sailors, I'm assuming?
No, no, not at all. My granddad was a sailor, and his name happens to be Leslie as well. And he went off to sea when he was 13 years old and sailed all around the world several times on working on different sorts of yachts and ships. And so it's in my blood from him. And I just got into sailing by chance. I had a friend who was into it, and he got me introduced to it, and I just took to it like a duck on water. That's all I wanted to do is be out there in the boat on the water, and so I learned to sail in Christchurch, New Zealand, and eventually moved up to Auckland when I started Olympic campaigning more seriously. Yeah,
What's your favorite boat to sail?
I guess I have three favorite boats. One is a P class, which you don't have in the States. It used to be the boat that we learnt to sail in. It was the junior class in New Zealand, and they say that if you can sail a P class, you can sail any boat in the world. And I
Okay.
think that's true. So I loved that boat. And then from there, I sailed the 470, and I spent a lot of time sailing that, at least 10 years probably in the 470, if not more. So I love that class. And of course, the America's Cup boat, like that was pretty amazing to have the opportunity to sail on that.
When you look at all the foils now, is that the normal evolution to you, or are you still a more of a monohull kind of fan?
I'm a diehard monohull fan. Like I love
Okay.
watching the foiling boats, but to me, it's not the same as the traditional America's Cup where you have spinnakers going up and down and Genoas up and down and big teams of sailors on board, and yeah, I miss that.
Your son Nick is going to be in the Queen's Cup this weekend, and we were just talking before this interview that I will be in Milwaukee, and we're on a similar boat. I think the 52 would be a perfect Olympic, and more importantly, I think it would be a perfect America's Cup boat. I think it would be unbelievable because it's real. I
I
mean, it
agree
is
with you.
it's buoy sailing and it's all the other kinds of stuff, but I think it'd be a perfect platform for maybe the old style America's Cup. Maybe it is
Yeah.
what it is, but
I, I love watching the TP52s. That racing is so close and so exciting. And I think that would be amazing America's Cup boat.
your sister was an Olympian. Am I correct on that?
Yes, Jenny. Yeah, she went
You're
to the Olympics in Sydney in the 470.
And you obviously your son is a world class match racer. We know Chris Poole a little bit, so that's where we've had the chance to have his across our bow, so to speak. How does so much talent end up in one place? And I say that because right after you, the Pettibone sisters are going to come on, and there's two sisters who are world class sailors from the same family. So is it the water you drink, or is it just the instruction you get?
I think a lot of it is the location we grew up in, actually. Yeah, to be honest, we grew up in a lovely town in Christchurch. It was right next to an estuary, so it was a really safe place to learn to sail, and it literally was walking distance from our home. Um, and yeah, I think geography has a lot to do with it as well. If we didn't live there, I might never have got into sailing, actually. Yeah,
Why
because
are
we're
Kiwis
so near the water like that.
why have Kiwis dominated sailing over the last 15 years? I mean, right now they're the best in the world. There's no doubt.
Yeah,
Why?
I think being such a small country is quite an advantage in some ways because um, although we do learn to sail in the regions, eventually, if you want to progress further, you end up living in Auckland. So you've got world-class sailors living in one place. So every weekend you can be sailing against world champions, Olympic medalists. It all happens here. It's quite a hub. And the other thing is our winter. Um, during our winter, our sailors can go overseas to the States or America to sail through their summer. But then when it's our summer, you come back home and you have a really good sailing here through summer months, whereas other places it's a lot colder and not so conducive to sailing, and people probably take a bit of time off.
We
So I
used to
think
go to.
that has
No, go ahead.
sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think that kind of helps us in a way that we can sail all year round, whether it's here or head off overseas.
I used to come down to Mount Cook all the time in the winter. I'm a ski coach in the winter for our national program. So our summers would be down there because we could come to New Zealand cheaper than we could go to some of the snowfields here in North America. So we'd come down. And the one thing I noticed from down there, and this is a conversation I've had with Richard Gladwell, is the concentration of yacht clubs and how many there are in such a small area. It is certainly more diverse than it is here in the States. And I'm sure that has something to do with that process as well.
Yes, I think so. Yeah, that's great that you got down skiing in the South
Yeah,
Island.
no, it's we loved it. We came down. I think we were better part of 10 or 11 years. We used to come down every summer and spend 3 weeks, 2.5, 3, 4 weeks whenever we come down. And we'd always end up taking 3 or 4 days and going sailing, and you have some fun and enjoy it. And it's a phenomenal country if you've never been there. It's just it has everything. It was if I were to die and go to heaven, I'd want to go to New Zealand.
It is a great place to live. Yeah.
Yeah. Last question, and I guess it just kind of goes back to what is it? When did you know you were good at this?
I guess when I had my first success, like when I was 15, talking about the junior classes, and it was the boat that everyone sailed when they were learning to sail, a bit like the Optimist now. And I guess I started off having some small successes in the P class, but I finished off in that class being the first girl ever to have won the P class nationals, and that's an event that had all the top young sailors in it, over 100 boats. And so I guess that was my first really big success. Back in those days, it was pretty major. I think since then, only one other girl has ever won it recently. But yeah, so that's when probably I thought, yes, this sport's for me. And but I never, at that age, I never ever dreamt that I'd have the opportunity to sail an America's Cup boat.
Yeah.
Never, not in my wildest dreams.
So
In those days, there was very little opportunity for women in sailing. So it was just the most amazing experience and an opportunity to have that you couldn't have dreamt of. Yeah.
Was this a Bill Koch experiment, or was this we were talking I worked for the New York Times for a long time, and in January of 95, there was actually ads in the paper looking for people to come part of this process. And obviously world champions and Olympic medalists and all these other folks showed up. And the conversation I had with Katie and with Debbie was a little bit of, if you're taking ads out in a paper, I'm not so seriously if this is a stunt or a real sail race. And then when who showed up, it's pretty amazing. Because you had you and Dawn, and you had some obviously world-class athletes in this group.
Yes, it was amazing. And Olympic rowers and, the power lifters and people from all walks of life were involved. And they're all amazing women, that's for sure. But you'd have to ask Bill what his purpose was. But my thinking is that he'd achieved something no one had done before by winning the America's Cup in his first attempt, the previous run. And I think, okay, I've done that. What can I do next? It's another first. I know. I'll win the America's Cup with a women's team.
Right.
I don't think it was a stunt. I think he really genuinely felt that if he provided the right environment, and that it could be done.
And everybody that sailed for him or with him has nothing but praise for the way he operated. He was a first-class manager. He was a good guy. The one question I have is you're kind of soft-spoken from everything I've been told.
you and Dawn is not soft spoken. That must have been an interesting relationship when you take over the helm. And Dawn can be a little fiery from time to time.
Well, maybe that's why we get on so well with chalk and cheese.
Yeah.
We've always had a really good friendship, and yeah, so yeah, I think sometimes you can be different personalities and get on super well. And she was a great friend to have when we were sailing. Yeah.
Well, two world-class athletes also understand the same language, so maybe that's part of it as well, because you sort of think the same way and probably think a little different than the rest of us who get around slower around the buoys than what you guys might have done. So I appreciate that. Well, listen, I appreciate your time. The movie debuts in end of August. They had the Nantucket event, and we just wanted to have some conversations with some folks that were on the boat, as it says behind me, rock the boat. You guys certainly did, and congratulations on a long career. And I really do appreciate very much spending a few moments with us.
Thank you, Greg. Best wishes to you.
Leslie, thank you very much. I'll make sure you get a copy when we put this up, and we'll talk to Mary. We're going to talk to Mary in August about the race, and then she's going to bring Hugh Jackman with her and Elizabeth Banks, so we'll get a little bit of bang when the movie actually comes out. I saw the movie, and it is amazing, absolutely amazing. Oh, it's really. She has done her. Yeah, it's not heavy-handed. I don't know how to explain it except to say that it's absolutely fair, straight ahead, and factual. And that's pretty cool. I like that. There's not a lot of Hollywood twist to it. It's just people working their tail off to try to do something nobody'd ever done before. And that's something. And you, ma'am, are one of the best that ever did it. So appreciate your time.
Yeah, hopefully I'll get a chance to see it. I'm going to do that regatta that's on in Newport, Rhode Island, the International Women's Regatta.
When is that?
September.
Okay.
That's September, and I'm going to be getting there, I think 2 days before it comes out. So hopefully get a chance to go and see it while I'm there, because I don't know if it's coming to New Zealand or not. Yeah.
Completely off the record, I'm just curious. You lived here for 10 years. Do you have dual citizenship, I'm assuming?
Well, I used to have, my dad was in the Air Force, so we traveled around a lot. And I used to have American passport, but I've only just recently forfeited it. So I did have dual. I had New Zealand and American, and that's what got me on the with the women's team. As I was American, I was born there, yeah. So and had my passport still. So.
I'm assuming you consider yourself a Kiwi, right?
I do now. Yes, yeah. I've been here most of my life. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
well, this has been.
Enjoy getting back there.
Leslie, thank you so much for your time, and like I said, I'll make sure you get a copy when this comes up. So thank you again.
Thank you.
Every 3 minutes, a baby is born with a cleft, making it difficult to talk, hear, eat, and even breathe. Many won't receive the treatment they need to thrive. Through training and financial support, Smile Train gives the power of healing back to local communities so they can provide life-changing surgeries and other services at no cost to families. Help us change the world one smile at a time.
I'll never forget the day I nearly died. I was a young journalist with a great career, starting a family. The only way we found out I had any kind of heart issue was when I went into sudden death. My coworkers sprung into action. They've recently been trained in life-saving CPR protocols developed by the American Heart Association. They're the ones that kept me alive until the medics came. They did many tests on me in the hospital after my cardiac arrest and created a treatment plan, all with research from the American Heart Association. I think unless you are a heart disease patient, you may not know how much work the American Heart Association does behind the scenes to save your life. Since my cardiac arrest, I've had 2 more children. I've watched all 3 of my children grow into adulthood. I'm gonna cry now. Graduate from college, my daughter got married. I have grandchildren, and I'm still here.
Learn more about the American Heart Association's work at helpheart.org.
Welcome back. We have an interesting discussion. We're going to talk to Nestor Lopez Duran, a former Michigan University professor who's going around the world on a boat, who kind of started in Lake St. Clair. And we're going to go through a whole process of a fictional book he written. called High or Low. Am I saying that right?
Hibaoa.
Okay. I know it's a French Polynesian island. I know Paul Gauguin died there and is buried there. I know that for sure, the great French painter. But we're going to start with the book, which is on Amazon. We're talking to you from the Fiji Islands, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, that's correct.
And I think it's 4:00 in the morning, Sunday, Father's Day, and it's obviously not that here. It's Saturday afternoon. So happy Father's Day to you. And
happy Father's to you in advance.
I guess I just want to start with you grew up in Venezuela. You obviously spent a lot of time in Ann Arbor. Your wife is from the area. What got you the inspiration about writing a book about a couple that went around the world on a boat? And part of that process is the plot twists and turns, which we'll get into. Why fiction, having been a textbook writer most of your life?
Yes, well, the inspiration came from two events that happened kind of simultaneously. The first one we were just discussing before we began recording was the death of my father-in-law. So he was a millwright who worked most of his life in the auto industry in Detroit and wanted to live a simple life in House Lake in northern Michigan. So he lived a frugal life and retired at 50, and he got to live this life for 10 years. Unfortunately, then he got diagnosed right when he turned 60 and died soon after. And this was happening right around the time that my wife and I were beginning to dream about leaving our jobs behind and moving into a boat and began sailing around the world. So it was kind of like a wake-up call about the dangers of waiting to pursue your dreams too late. And at the same time, we were hearing all these stories of other would-be sailors whose dreams were also being cut short because of illness, financial setbacks, global pandemics, and which cut many of these dreams quite short. So I decided I wanted to write a book to inspire others to pursue that kind of life and to pursue the life that they wanted now and not wait, and dangers of waiting. And also presenting a realistic picture of what it looks like to actually live in a boat, because is kind of the highest of the highs and the lowest of lows. It's beautiful. It's a life that we love, but it's actually quite challenging.
Okay, so the book is about a couple, Sydney and Tom, and a little bit about how they start with Lake St. Clair and how they make this determination to buy a boat, fix it up, take that boat around the world. And just before they make those decisions, they come down, one of them comes down, Tom comes down with cancer.
Yes.
And part of the push from Cindy is essentially, do you want to follow your dreams, or do you want to sort of bask in the difficulty of facing the most mortal question we all face,
yes,
which is obviously death? And I was kind of reading along, and the local stuff on Lake St. Clair is really cool and accurate, and it's kind of gone through this process. But when you got to the cancer part of this, I kind of just dropped my teeth. It's accurate, it's poignant, and it's gut wrenching. And I found that for a first time. Again, I know you have a writing background, but if you don't do anything else, pick up that part of the book and read it, because I think it's phenomenal. I think you just did a great job with the prose and the way you wrote. I think that's it was really fun to read.
Thank you. Yeah, I think the experience that we had with my father-in-law was very informative to that part of the book. He was going through cancer treatment in Ann Arbor while we were still working there, and we were highly involved with his treatment. So I got very close to that experience. So I tried to mimic for Cindy what my mother-in-law was going through in the way that caretakers take this new role of both caretakers and also partners with a patient who is going through terminal cancer, which is quite a traumatic and a moving experience.
Why fiction?
To me, it gave me more liberties than waiting for me to finish the circumnavigation to write a memoir.
Okay.
And it allowed me to tell stories that I wanted to tell in the moment without having to wait. at the same time, many of the events that happen in the book are kind of inspired by things that have happened to us, both in the process of trying to find the boat, refitting the boat, but also once we actually set sail.
Is this your first time developing characters as a writer?
Yes.
Okay. Now, you obviously followed a little bit of that trail because I'm talking to you on a boat in Fiji. So how close, not the illness, but the parallel of life and fantasy was kind of the same line for you.
Yes, that's correct. So that to some degree, I see myself and my wife a lot on Tom and Cindy.
Is this the first time for you sailing, or have you been a lifelong sailor?
Not a lifelong sailor, but I got into sailing late in life. So I'm not one of those kids who grew up sailing like the kid in the book,
right.
Colt. But I got obsessed with sailing, similar to Tom and Cindy after a cruise vacation in the Caribbean. And since then, I've been sailing for many years.
I say that because there are people on YouTube that, literally decide on a Thursday afternoon to buy a boat and the next week, fix it up and then go around the world. And they literally don't know how to raise a halyard. I think those are people on the crazy side. And there's those chronicles on YouTube. There are those guys. And that's why I'm asking. So
I was an ROA yacht master before we began this process already.
What kind of boat are you on now? What is the boat you're sailing?
I'm on a Lagoon 42 catamaran.
Nice boat. Nice and stable. What's been the most difficult time of the I'm just curious if you've had any rough spots on the sailing part of the trip that you're taking personally.
Yes, we just had it. Our most difficult passage happened 2 weeks ago, well, 1 week ago. We spent the cyclone season in New Zealand, and you might be familiar that the New Zealand to Fiji and back passage is notoriously difficult because it's not trade winds. You are dealing with multiple systems that are coming from the Tasman Sea. So we just had our most difficult passage coming back from New Zealand to Fiji. We spent a 24-hour period where we almost never saw the 20s in wind speed. The average speed was 35, goes into low 40s for 24 hours non-stop with 15-foot seas at 9 seconds, which is not comfortable on any major. So it was very difficult. And that was the worst part, but the entire trip was very challenging. And we are two-handed, so it's just my wife and I managing the boat, which makes it also pretty difficult.
Going around the world, if you go on a catamaran, that's one way to go. That's one of the better ways to go because it's such a stable boat. It makes life a little simpler, especially if you're. What's your time frame for going around the world? I'm just curious.
So we began 2.5 years ago. So we're on our third year of the circumnavigation, and we hope to be back in the Caribbean in about three more years.
Okay.
So hopefully doing in 5 to 7 years.
All right. Let me get back briefly to the book. One of the things that I found interesting is that when you start to romanticize sailing, which is kind of my question of going around the world, you did not do a lot of escapist kind of plot. You just kind of got to the point. Was that a specific choice to deal with sailing on one hand and then the medical part of that other on the other? Is that kind of the way that went?
Yes. So because I'm living this life, I knew that it's not all daiquiris at the beach like some people think. And even though our families and friends they only see the pictures that we post on Instagram, they don't realize how difficult other aspects of this life are. So I wanted to present a picture of that life that is true to what it is the highest of highs and the lowest of lows.
Yeah.
Sometimes we love this, and sometimes we wish we would live in a farm in the mountains with sheep.
When you wrote this book, did you query all the way through it to come to an end and sort of have thoughts, or did the actual book develop as you were writing? And then the follow-up question is, how long did it take you to write it?
Yeah. So this first book, the first version of the book was actually a treatment for a screenplay.
Okay.
Because I had a little bit of part of my life I spent in film, right between grad school and going back to academia. So initially I thought I was going to write a screenplay. And as part of the treatment, I did plot the entire thing and then went back and then converted the treatment into a book. But I began writing that treatment in probably 2015, so a little bit over 10 years ago. And then I truly began converting the treatment to a novel right around the time that we moved into a boat. And so that made the part of the book that deals with the refit and also the illness easier to write, because I had experienced similar issues. And then I finished writing the first version, the first full draft, when we landed in Hibaoa, of all places, which was pretty special.
Having written the treatment, which is a whole nother work in itself, basically fleshing out the book is what you're doing, is taking the summary and character development is in this. I thought was interesting. How many of those traits that are in Tom? I'm just curious.
Well, I see myself in Tom a lot, especially about our obsession with things that we love. So Tom becomes very, very obsessed with sailing. And I had similar experience as a youngster in Venezuela, being obsessed with music and wanted to be a cellist, and then moving to the States to pursue that. Then I became obsessed with science and became a professor. And then I became obsessed with sailing. and now I live on a boat going around the world. So I'm pretty much as obsessive as Tom. And my wife, to some degree, modeled Cindy. So Cindy, the character in the book, is a little bit modeled after my wife, and especially the parts of her that don't take Tom's too seriously. Like she actually pushes Tom to be realistic, and my wife is very, very realistic. So we complement each other very well, just like Tom and Cindy complement themselves very well.
I know some of these questions are sort of inside baseball, but it's sort of one author or one writer to another. That's the reason I'm asking some of these questions. It's just a personal as you're fleshing out these things. I wrote a column for 30 years, and every day you had to come up with a subject. And I never had a problem coming up with subjects because life, just look out the window, you can find something, right? But I think that goes back to the curiosity that you have as a writer, the curiosity you have as an observer of what's in front of you, which I think is kind of important. What are you most proud of the book? What is the thing that, if you're, sort of put a one tagline on it, what makes you the happiest about the book itself?
I think the prose, and I tell you why. I don't think the prose is like the type of prose that is going to get nominated for the Booker Award. But to me, I'm really proud of it. It's still and the feedback that I'm getting from people is that they really, really enjoy the prose. And the reason I'm most excited about it, or most proud of it, is that I come from scientific writing. And scientific writing is kind of like the other extreme of this type of literary fiction prose. So it was very difficult for me to do that transition, going from the type of writing that is extremely dry on purpose,
right,
to write a prose that actually move people. So I love when people says, yes, and I was tearing up at the end of the book, and I enjoy that because I think that the prose did play its role.
We've always had this longstanding, I've mentioned this more than once on the show, journalists, newspaper, print people have a hard time going to radio and television because they don't write conversationally. Radio and television people who transition into newspapering or into magazines don't have a difficult time because they've already learned to write conversationally. And the best writing in the world is obviously Hemingway, and that's that conversational process. And I know we're getting back into the weeds of writing, but I think that's something you did really well. I think for me, the high point of the book is the challenges that Tom faces about death and mortality. And you do a really good job of explaining that. And it opened up some thoughts and some ideas even in my own head
that I ever thought of. And as an author, I hopefully that's good feedback, because you made me think. And that's all you're looking for as a writer, is reaction to what it is that you've written, good or bad. In this particular case, it was thoughtful. And I think that's something that if you're going to think about reading this book, God, pick it up. And that's all you're looking for as a writer, is reaction to what it is that you've written, good or bad. In this particular case, it was thoughtful. And I think that's something that if you're going to think about reading this book, God, pick it up, because that's again one of those points of, I think, of interest. Well, listen, I appreciate your time. I don't want to keep you up too much there in Fiji on Father's Day, but I do appreciate the time.
Thank you. So the book is available for pre-order for the ebook in Amazon. It launches officially on July 31st. So in July 31st, will be available in all the other retailers. We actually have a party in Musket Cove Marina in Fiji, which is a very famous place for sailors in the South Pacific, where we're going to have the launch party with all the cruising community, which will be pretty special.
Well, do me a favor. Can you send me a picture, and we can at least display that for one of our shows in early August? We'll display it and maybe give another plug to the book. So if we can do that, I'd appreciate it. Appreciate your opportunities, and certainly safe travels as you go.
Thank you, Greg. Bye-bye then.
Want to thank Mary and all the folks involved with Leslie and Debbie and Katie for coming aboard and talking a little bit about Mighty Mary, which will be out in theaters fairly soon. And get a chance to see that. I think you'll find it to be interesting. And I also wanted to thank Mr. Duran, our writer, for I get a chance to get a book copy and read some of it. Really interesting. We are headed, as we speak, we're headed to Milwaukee for the Queen's Cup. We'll bring you that the end of next week. And then next week, we get a chance to spend some time up in Bayfield, Wisconsin for the Bayfield Week with Keith Stauber and a whole bunch of Wisconsin and Minnesotans checking out the Apostle Isles on the west end of Lake Superior. And I think that'll be a fun show. We're trying to get back to more episodic kind of TV, but when these opportunities to speak to two of the best sailors in American history, along with Leslie and Mary, we just couldn't pass it up. So we hope you enjoyed the show, and good winds, and we'll see you soon.